We no longer see a daydreaming high schooler, but a young man living a quiet and brutal life. Peter is now like a ghost in the heart of New York. This city has 9 million people. They cheer for Spider-Man every time he swings past the buildings, but no one knows who the guy behind the mask is. At this point, Peter believes he has learned the lesson of responsibility. He thinks that love and connection only bring danger to others, so the best solution is to erase Peter Parker and remain only as Spider-Man. But this is his greatest mistake. The title, Brand New Day, sounds full of hope. But in reality, for Peter, it is a new day full of emptiness. The start of a deep identity crisis where he must learn how to be human before his body and mind shatter under the weight of the mask. From that bitter break with the past, Peter Parker begins sliding down a path of thinking he believes is maturity. But in truth, it is a serious psychological error. Peter is living in a state that philosophers call bad faith, or simply put, deceiving himself. He convinces himself that erasing Peter Parker from everyone's mind is a noble act, a necessary sacrifice to protect those he loves. Yet behind that noble exterior lies a much weaker truth. Peter is using the Spider-Man mask as a tool to escape his pain. He would rather be a masked hero, busy day and night, than face the emptiness of returning to his cold attic, where no one waits and there are no calls from Ned or MJ. He believes he has no other choice, that fate has destined him to be alone, but in reality, he is denying himself his own freedom and right to happiness. Peter Parker is currently not only fighting crime on the streets but also battling his own personal identity. He views his ordinary human side, the Peter Parker side, as a burden and a fatal weakness. He believes that if Peter Parker didn't exist, his loved ones would no longer be targets for his enemies. This leads to an extreme situation where he dedicates all his time and mind to the role of Spider-Man. He becomes more professional, better equipped with technology, and even more effective at catching criminals. But the price to pay is the gradual disappearance of the soul behind that red and blue suit. When someone uses responsibility as an excuse to stop living a real life, they are no longer a true hero, but becoming a soulless justice machine. He tries to become a perfect symbol, forgetting that it's his flaws, anxieties, and human connections that make him the friendly neighbor Spider-Man the world truly loves. This conflict is most clearly reflected in Peter's behavior regarding social media. Although he constantly says he stays out of Ned and MJ's lives to keep them safe, every night he secretly picks up his phone to track every post and photo his friends upload. He sees them laughing, sees them starting new chapters of their lives at MIT with new friends and even new romantic relationships. This action is not healthy concern but rather a painful obsession. Peter is living his life through a phone screen, becoming a bystander looking into the happiness he could have possessed. This is proof that he has never truly let go. He is only trying to suppress the deep-seated longing for connection within himself. Observing from a distance gives him a false sense that he is still a part of their lives, while in reality, he is only building an insurmountable wall between them. Besides that, Peter's biggest mistake lies in stripping MJ and Ned of their right to choose for themselves. You believe you're doing what's best for them by hiding the truth, but in reality, you're treating them like children incapable of protecting themselves or making their own choices. Peter grants himself the right to decide what MJ should remember and who she should love. You fear that if MJ knows the truth, she'll be in danger again, and you can't bear the weight of another loss. However, true love isn't about extreme overprotection to the point of stripping away the other person's agency. By staying out of their lives, Peter doesn't just make himself lonely. He robs MJ and Ned of a vital part of their memories, a core part of who they really are. The protection Peter offers is actually an imposition, colored by fear, where he chooses a false sense of safety over the sincerity and inherent risks of human relationships. The deeper he goes down this path, the more Peter falls into a severe existential crisis. He begins to ask himself, who is he really? Is he the poor kid Peter Parker or the savior Spider-Man of New York? When the mask and the skin become one, the line between duty and self starts to blur. He no longer finds joy in his victories, replaced instead by a persistent sense of exhaustion. The more New York praises Spider-Man, the more abandoned Peter feels. The city seems too crowded for a hero who doesn't have a single friend to share his life with. He is trying to prove to himself that he's fine living independently, but every action of his reveals an inner brokenness. He's living in a paradox. The more great and powerful Spider-Man becomes, the more small and withered Peter Parker grows. This self-torture is a dangerous psychological trap that prevents him from seeing that help and community are what he needs to truly grow up. He ignores Captain George Stacy's advice about the importance of leaning on others, because in the mind of someone traumatized, help is synonymous with weakness and the risk of bringing harm to others. Peter stands at a crossroads of maturity, but instead of moving forward to become a balanced man, he chooses to retreat into the shadows of solitude. All this extreme psychological pressure, the emotional repression and denial of identity cannot last forever without consequence. When the mind can no longer endure, it begins to resist through the body. Peter fails to realize that the imbalance between his hero life and personal life is slowly destroying him from within. He is like a guitar string pulled too tight, waiting for the slightest touch to snap. And that small touch, the final straw, the drop that overflows the glass, is the sight of MJ being intimate with her new boyfriend. Peter's psychological repression erupts through biological changes in his body, manifesting his spider half. This biological transformation is the direct result of a soul screaming in despair, leading Peter into a painful phase. Yet, it is necessary to reshape his own self. He didn't expect that by trying to suppress his Peter Parker side so Spider-Man could focus on justice, his body would choose the most extreme reaction. Peter wakes up to find himself encased in a giant biological silk cocoon hanging outside his penthouse window. This image is not just a bizarre event but a clear metaphor for rebirth. But in a painful and distorted way, the webbing now shoots directly from his wrists. While it seems like a worthy power upgrade, it is actually more of a curse than a gift. His already heightened senses suddenly become overloaded to the point of agony. The bustling city of New York is no longer a familiar playground but a labyrinth of noise and light so harsh it leaves him reeling. Peter's eyes sometimes turn pitch black, as cold and soulless as the eyes of a true predator. This is the symbol that psychologists call the manifestation of pain through the body. As Peter refuses to take time to live as a human, his body is slowly turning him into a true spider, pushing his humanity into the shadows. This transformation does not just stop at physical manifestations but also begins to invade his reason and emotions. During his encounter with Scorpion, Peter no longer maintained the composure of a friendly neighborhood hero. Instead, he lunged at his enemy with an aggression and brutality never seen before. A primal rage erupted from the very mutations in his DNA that were spiraling out of control. Peter overwhelmed his opponent with brute force rather than skill, and in the loss of his reason, he nearly caused the death of a police officer present at the scene. This is a grave warning that if Peter continues to sever all social ties, he will soon become a wild beast, driven only by survival and territorial instincts. Terrified of the monster growing within, Peter turns to Bruce Banner to seek answers. Banner, who has spent his life living and struggling with a monster persona, gave worrying assessments about how Peter's DNA is mutating due to extreme psychological pressure. The inhibitor device that Banner uses is a suggestion for Peter to control his power, but at the same time, it also raises an ethical question. Should a hero use technology to suppress his nature instead of facing the root of his pain? This change does not bring a sense of proud maturity but rather a feeling of self-loathing. The silk cocoon or the pitch-black eyes are proof that Peter cannot separate the mask from his skin without causing permanent damage. He is standing at the crossroads of life and death for his own identity. Either he accepts the shedding of his old self to become a mature man who knows how to balance everything, or he lets his spider nature completely swallow what remains of Peter Parker. His body spoke up in the most extreme way, and he had no choice but to face it before it was too late. But looking back, Peter's journey to rediscover himself wasn't lonely, as he accidentally saw reflections of himself in the people around him. In the absolute solitude of New York, Peter Parker is like someone lost in a hall of mirrors, where every supporting character appears, not just to drive the plot, but to reflect a fragmented piece of his own soul. These people represent the different paths Peter could take, or the consequences of the wrong choices he is currently enduring. Leading them is Frank Castle, or the Punisher, who serves as the most vivid warning of Peter's potential dark future. Frank is a man who let grief completely consume his identity, someone who renounced all human connections to become a relentless punishment machine. When Peter looks at Frank, he sees someone who turned loss into a career. That is Peter's potential end. If he tries to erase the name Peter Parker and remain only Spider-Man, Frank is a mirror reflecting the emptiness of a life defined solely by duty. Their interaction, whether seemingly witty or dramatic, is essentially an ideological struggle. Does Peter want to become a ghost like Frank, someone living among humans but not belonging to them? Frank is proof that if a superhero abandons compassion and connection, all that remains is a soulless weapon. From another perspective, the appearance of Bruce Banner brings a deep insight into the struggle between instinct and reason. Banner, a genius forced to live with the Hulk inside, best understands what Peter is going through with his new DNA mutations. Through Banner, we see the conflict of trying to control one's true nature and technology. The suppression device Banner uses isn't just a scientific tool. It is a symbol of how humanity fears its own power and survival instincts. Banner's warnings about the dangers of altering mutated DNA serve as a reminder that Peter cannot use temporary fixes to escape profound psychological shifts. Banner's presence helps Peter realize that being a superhero isn't about destroying the beast within, but learning to coexist with it without losing his humanity. The character Jean Grey serves as a painful emotional mirror. Jean is not merely a villain, she is a victim of abuse and a loss of autonomy. The way Jean infiltrates and manipulates others' minds to achieve her goals is essentially an amplified version of the mistakes Peter made with MJ and Ned. Peter thinks he's protecting them by keeping secrets, but in reality, he's stripping away their right to know and choose, much like Jean controlling her victims. The link between Peter and Jean Grey is that both are wounded individuals using their power to control the world around them as a way to compensate for loss. Facing Jean, Peter is forced to confront his own behavior and realize that protection without respecting another's will is just a form of fear-based imposition. Ultimately, MJ and Ned remain the brightest reflections of the normal life Peter Parker longs for but is afraid to reach out and touch. Their appearance after 4 years comes as a shock to Peter. Seeing MJ happy with a new boyfriend and Ned busy with his own projects, Peter realizes the city moves on perfectly well without his presence in their personal lives. MJ still keeps the broken black dahlia necklace, a detail showing that while memories may fade, feelings always remain. Yet, their normalcy only makes Peter feel increasingly like an outsider. They are reminders that life goes on, and Peter locking himself in a cocoon of sacrifice is just a way to deny his right to grow and be happy. The supporting characters in this phase aren't just companions or enemies, they are the pieces that shape Peter's transformation. From Frank's coldness and Banner's repression to Jean's controlling pain and MJ's quiet revival. Everything forces Peter to stop and ask himself, if Spider-Man is all he has, then who will save Peter Parker? These reflections push Peter to his limit, where he can no longer hide behind the mask but must step into the light to face a harsh reality and reconnect with the world as his true self. His character development begins with admitting that he needs these people, not for power, but to remind him that he is still human. But just as Peter starts to open up, reality deals him its most painful blows, forcing him to shatter his final illusions of control or sacrifice. Everything begins to collapse when Peter realizes his biggest secret, the name Peter Parker, has been discovered by Jean Grey through letters he wrote to MJ but never dared to send. In a fit of rage, Jean Grey decides to use Peter's greatest weakness to attack him. She is not just an opponent with psychic powers. She is a mirror reflecting Peter's own pain, only at a much more extreme level. The most painful scene is when Jean possesses MJ's body to deceive Peter. In that moment, it seems as though MJ has remembered everything. She calls his name and kisses him. Peter bursts into tears. He believes a miracle has happened, that his 4 years of loneliness have finally come to an end. But it is only a cruel illusion. When Jean revealed herself and mocked his feelings, Peter was forced to face the harsh truth that he couldn't force reality back to how it was, and he had no right to take away MJ's current life just to fill his own void. The battle on Roosevelt Island was where Peter had to make life or death choices regarding his identity while facing an army of ninjas. And Jean's control. Peter realized that the inhibitors he borrowed the idea from Bruce Banner were actually just another iron cage he had locked himself in. He had tried to suppress his spider nature out of fear, But now, to save those he loved, he had to accept his true self completely. The moment Peter removed the inhibitor, his eyes turned pitch black, and organic webbing erupted with great force. It wasn't a moment where he lost himself, but one where he reconciled power with responsibility. He was no longer a teenager afraid of his body's changes, but a mature man who knew how to use all his resources to enforce justice. When invading Jean Grey's mind, Peter didn't use force to attack, but empathy to soothe. He showed Jean the memory of his aunt, a woman who accepted and loved him even after knowing he was a mutant. Through this, Peter didn't just save Jean from the darkness of resentment, but also saved himself from his own guilt. He realized that people like him and Jean, even if seen by the world as different or dangerous, still deserve love and a community to belong to. Peter accepted the burden of every mistake and pain, but no longer let it paralyze his will. The final moment of the battle came when Frank Castle pulled the trigger of his sniper rifle aimed at Jean. Peter did not hesitate to leap out and take the bullet. That shot nearly took his life, but it stood as a testament to Spider-Man's complete transformation. He was no longer a hero fighting out of duty, but one fighting out of compassion for another person who was just as wounded as he was. Peter would rather endure the pain, standing on the brink of death, than let violence and hatred continue their cycle. As he fell, the illusion of an invincible hero died with him. In its place rose a flesh and blood Peter Parker, capable of feeling pain, love, and true sacrifice. This climactic conflict swept away all self-deception, leaving a Peter Parker ready to start a new chapter, where he no longer has to run from his own shadow. After crossing the line between life and death to protect Jean Grey, Peter wakes up in the hospital, realizing the shadows of isolation he built have begun to fade. He sees Frank Castle at his bedside, a man who vowed to sever all human connections, now choosing to protect his secret and his life. The image of Frank wearing the Spider-Man mask to distract the crowd outside the building is a symbolic detail. It shows that for the first time in 4 years, Peter no longer has to shoulder the weight of the hero symbol alone. That strength has now been shared, and Peter is allowed to leave the hospital as an ordinary person, a young man finding his way back to the life he once deliberately rejected. Peter visits Aunt May's grave, but this time, his state of mind is completely different. He no longer stands there like a sinner torturing himself with the pain of loss or feelings of guilt. Peter has now learned the most important lesson about responsibility. A true hero is not a perfect, emotionless fighting machine, but one whose vulnerabilities, flaws, and love for humanity create the real power of Spider-Man. Sacrifice does not mean the erasure of one's personal identity, because when Peter Parker disappears, Spider-Man is just a soulless shadow. He promises Aunt May, and himself, that from now on he will never again choose the lonely path to protect others, because doing so only ends up hurting everyone. Peter's maturity is also clearly reflected in how he treats MJ. Instead of selfishly using the past to force her to love him as before, Peter chooses to respect her current life and her right to self-determination. He realizes that true love means letting the person you love freely choose their own happiness, rather than treating them like an object to be kept in a glass cage of your own making. Peter accepts the reality that the current MJ doesn't know who he is, which helps him break free from the obsession of the past to start building new connections based on sincerity and equality. The moment Peter steps into the old shop to meet MJ is when the dawn truly begins to shine. Without needing long explanations about the multiverse or complex miracles, Peter simply walks up, introduces himself, and does their signature handshake as MJ says his name with a look of shock yet pure joy. That was the moment the silk cocoon that had imprisoned Peter's soul for 4 years completely shattered. He had truly been reborn. This isn't the beginning of a new power, but the return of a person who has found their place in the community. Ending this journey, Peter Parker has completed his character development in the most brilliant way. He is no longer the teenager longing for a mentor's guidance, nor the lone hero isolating himself in pain. He has become a mature man who knows how to balance the responsibility of saving the world with the right to live a happy life. The title of A New Day is now an affirmation of hope. A hero doesn't lie in a high-tech suit or frightening biological mutations, but in the courage to take off the mask and face the world as his true self. Peter Parker chose to live among 9 million New Yorkers, not as a ghost, but as a truly friendly neighbor. He knows that friendship and love are the most powerful weapons to overcome any adversity. MJ,